Well, this is just brilliant. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg got into a back and forth in a hearing with Republican Congressman Scott Perry and just showed him what's up. It was really good to see Pete Buttigieg have a chance to the face of Scott Perry to go through the dishonest talking points, inaccurate talking points that he had espoused. This is discussing electric vehicles. And so often, without being challenged, you have talking points on so many issues, but including in the sort of green energy, Biden investments in things like EVs conversation. And seeing pushback is really good, especially from someone as talented as Pete Buttigieg. So with that being said, here is this.
And this dictatorial policy.
Well, thank you. Given time is limited, I will confine myself to addressing the factually incorrect portions of what you have said, beginning with the assertion that EV sales are going down. They are, in fact, going up.
Does that include
every
government sales
year,
or private sales?
Every single year.
Private sales
more
or government
Americans
sales,
have purchased
Mr. Secretary?
EVs. The entire market.
The government's forced to buy them, so sales are going up, but private sector.
There are private sales
not.
too, yeah.
I'd like those numbers.
Sure. 1.2 million EVs were sold in the U.S. in 2020.
How many government and how many private?
We'll get you that breakout, but as you know, more private citizens buy EVs than government purchases.
No, I don't.
Let me address
that's
the second
true.
factual mistake in your remarks, which was that EV costs are getting higher. They're in fact getting lower, and according to J.D. Power, have now reached parity or are slightly lower than
with
the
or without
equivalent
subsidy,
gas-powered
Mr.
car.
Secretary. With or without
that does include the subsidy. That's right. But the point is, they are going lower.
But they're not, because we're all buying them.
Your statement that they are going up is
them.
incorrect.
And I really do apologize for the that's coming through. It is irritating, I get it, but not much we can do on this clip.
The third incorrect assertion you made is that sales dropped in Q1. They did not drop compared to Q1 of the previous year. Of course, if you compare them to Q4, they drop, because they always do, because car sales are seasonal. But I would imagine most people are aware of that. And
no,
fourth,
I'm talking about
I want to address
EV, Q4 to Q1. EV, not just overall car sales.
Any car sales go down Q1 to Q4 because more people buy cars in Q4. But what I'm telling you is every single year, more Americans buy EVs than the year before. And the word tailspin is just a bizarre word to use for a growing sector of our economy. We also think that since that's the way that the market is headed, we should not allow China to build on the advantage that they developed during the Trump administration, not because they're environmentalists, but because they understand the economic power of trying to dominate the EV market. We want those EVs to be made in America, and increasingly they are.
I'm happy to have them made in America, Mr. Secretary. What I'm not happy about is the mandate. The American people should be able to buy.
That brings me to the fourth and final thing that I need to
yield.
challenge as being factually inaccurate, which there is no mandate. You can purchase a gas car if you want to pay.
Yeah, I don't know what that talking point is. I was at a Trump rally, actually. It was in Racine. The one that you should absolutely go watch if you haven't already. Quite the experience. But one of the talking points I was confronted with was sometimes in these conversations when the person feels frazzled, they'll just turn around the interview and start asking me questions. And so the person was asking me, do you have an electric vehicle? And I was saying, no, actually right now I don't. It's an old car I've had for a while. I'm going to get an electric vehicle next for my next car, but want to sort of see this one through. And she says, see, well, in Biden's America, he's going to force you to have only electric vehicles. We're in Biden's America, and that's not happening. And also, it seems to be the progression, the transition that the Biden administration, Democrats are wanting to facilitate would be one focused on minimizing economic pain during the transition. Because the beautiful thing is, as we've talked about a lot before, renewable energy, if we can make this transition to green energy, is cheaper for consumers than fossil fuels. But any transition like this one could cause some instability, understandably, as we try to become more reliant on renewable energy, less reliant on fossil fuels. I'll remind you, though, that right now in the United States, as you can see here, U.S. energy production has exceeded consumption by record amount. And this does include oil and gas. So while trying to make investments to push us forward into renewable energy and progress and dominate in these different industries, it's not like, as the story goes, Biden just shutting down all the other options for the time being, and that seems to be perfectly rational. And again, it flies in the face of what we hear right-wingers often espouse. But also, one of the points I've made a lot before is in these sorts of hearings on Fox News, you'll have individuals espouse concerns about the EV market not exploding fast enough, or sales not as on fire as expected, even if the demand continues to increase, or how we properly manage, for example, the grid being able to handle some of these different systems. Perfectly acceptable concerns, and there does need to be more technological advancements made to get to that fully renewable energy future. There does need to be costs lowered with things like, for example, electric vehicles. All of that's acceptable to bring up. I just don't get how that in their minds means we shouldn't be trying to make those investments. Any concern that you could voice, to me, bolsters the importance of things like the Inflation Reduction Act, one of Biden's landmark achievements that is trying to push us forward, trying to make those investments and solve those issues that are raised as sometimes an argument in favor of not doing anything, which I don't understand. HuffPost reports this, by the way. U.S. companies have created more than 300,000 clean energy jobs since President Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law in August of 2022, according to a detailed new analysis from an environmental advocacy group. So why not create jobs? Try to make sure that we are competitive with countries like China in this industry, and make sure that as this, what I feel like you have to realize is an inevitable transition, eventually, as it happens, we benefit from it, and we're not on our heels, which is what it seems like many of these Republicans are advocating on behalf of. By the way, Canary Media reports this as well. Renewable energy already beats fossil fuels on costs globally, and according to analysts, the gap is only going to grow, and you can see this visualized. So it's incredible to think about, and that's why it's so worth it to make the investments now, allocate the proper resources now to get us to that incredible future where we're only reliant on renewable energy, and then it's cheaper for everyone. By 2030, technology improvements could slash today's prices by a quarter for wind and by half for solar, according to the authors of a recent report from clean energy think tank RMI. We could massively save Americans and citizens globally money if we could make these investments now. Absolutely worth it. Not to mention, and I have more clips to play for you, by the way, of Pete Buttigieg, but for Scott Perry, don't you want, just on a fundamental level, even if you, for some reason, are super skeptical of climate science, just when you see us dumping pollution into our environment, wouldn't you prefer, if it's cheaper and better for the planet, wouldn't you prefer we have clean air to breathe, ecosystems that are surviving so that we can have proper food sources, air that we can breathe, or clean water, clean air, I might have already said clean air? Isn't that something that everyone can be on board with, especially if it's economically beneficial to the United States? Before saying more, here is Pete Buttigieg a little while ago making similar points on Fox News.
Let me just pursue that if I could with you. Tesla sales fell 8.5% the first quarter of this year. Ford this week is laying off 2/3 of its workforce at the F-150 electric Lightning plant. It's also scaling back a battery production facility because of sagging sales. EV sales are nowhere near what this president wanted or expected, yet the administration continues to shove them down consumers' throats. Why?
Well, let's be clear. Consumers have wanted and purchased more EVs every single year than the year before. And, Tesla is facing more competition as GM and Ford and Stellantis and other competitive players start to make sure they get a piece of the EV market. let's be clear that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and we can't pretend otherwise. Sometimes when these debates happen, I feel like it's the early 2000s, and I'm talking to some people who think that we can just have landline phones forever. The reality is that the automotive sector is moving toward EVs, and the U.S. can either fall behind China or we can claim the lead. President Biden wants to make sure that those EVs are made in America, especially
Again, some similar points being made there. I will say also that another just strange part of this argument is it will be correctly pointed out that our power grids are still largely dependent on fossil fuels. So that means that a lot of electric vehicles, in that sense, are being charged based on energy created through fossil fuels. Fair. And also, even if it were 100% fossil fuels creating the electricity that's then charging an electric vehicles are still just more efficient. They produce less energy altogether. And then as we ramp up renewable energies powering the grid, then you have a really good situation there. And I mentioned jobs. It's expected that more than 1.5 million jobs will be created by the Inflation Reduction Act, which was this huge piece of legislation that Biden signed into law that did a lot of things like lowering prescription drug costs, ACA expansions, but one of the key parts of it was investments in our response to climate change and green energy, the largest green energy investment in history. And 1.5 million jobs will be created over the next decade. So let's create the job. Let's have the thriving industry here in the United States, and let's make sure we have a livable planet for our children and grandchildren, all while saving ourselves money. Here's one more just Fox News Pete Buttigieg moment while we're on the subject of him.
Economy rebounded from COVID. Let me be clear. Unemployment is lower than it was even before COVID. Stock market is higher than it was even before COVID. And job creation is faster than it was even before COVID. So no matter what rebound effects you're talking about, these are economic results that have not happened since before I was born. Now, in terms of cost, that's been a major issue. And by the way, that's been a major issue in every wealthy country. This is an example of something that was largely affected by COVID. But I think there's a reason why inflation in the U.S. is lower than it is in any of the other G7
It's
countries.
actually not true.
And,
At least, well, not according to the Washington Post. They say Japan, Italy, and Germany all had lower inflation rates than we do, and Italy's is less than 1%.
They may have been looking at a different time period, but I'm telling you, if you look at the overall time period when it was toughest, our inflation rate was better. And I would add, right now, wages are going up faster than prices. That means even after inflation, you're coming out ahead. Now, that's an across-the-board number, but some people...
For 2 years, that wasn't true.
We had a tough bout of inflation, no doubt that we did, which is why President Biden is trying to lower costs. Now, look, congressional Republicans were against President Biden when he worked to cut insulin down to $35.
And then he goes on to talk about so many things that we've talked about. For the sake of time, I'll cut it off there. But I know he's the transportation secretary, so his job's not to be a Biden campaign surrogate. But I wish he would be a Biden campaign surrogate, because that's the message that needs to be delivered. You saw it with a particular subject, but then also just the broader record of Biden, he's really good at making the case for, and that I'm not hearing enough of. In my interview with Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, I was saying to him, can you get some of your colleagues to do what Ro Khanna does so nicely, which is go out on Fox News and publicly and make the case aggressively, strongly, and just proudly as to why Biden should be reelected? Because it's not that the facts aren't on Biden's side. It's that not enough people are being delivered the facts, right? Aren't being explained the facts to them. So that's what needs to happen. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. If you want to get the daily extra episode of the show, you can do so by clicking the join button below.